Good to go? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Till. I work for Fair Consulting. I'm going to be talking to you today about C4HANA extensibility, Kyma, Varkes, and a bunch of other things because I thought my title was already so long that people might not digest it all anyway in a title like this. So yes, my name is David. I love technology in all its forms. I think when I was about 9 years old, I got my first computer. It was a 386. Installed DOS on it, destroyed DOS a few times, had people have to come out and fix it, which was to great disgust for my parents because it was another cost. I can take this as well. Sorry, can you hear me? So yeah, and then we upgraded to a 486 DX2 66 megahertz, that is. So, computers now are in the gigahertz. So that gives you some understanding of how long I've been playing around with computers. So I've been working with SAP technology for roughly 10 years now. I started in the CRM space doing ABAP development. It was actually in a project where we implemented one of the first investigative case management solutions in Australia. From there I've also done Fiori, UI5, cloud platform integration, PI, PO, HANA, S4HANA, and more recently we started looking into C4HANA. I've also enjoyed doing things outside of SAP. As you can see, listed a few random languages up there. If I had to pick one language to start studying now, I'd probably be interested in something like I don't know, Julia or R or something more interesting, just because it sounds like fun. As a kid, I was always taking technology and hardware apart, which also annoyed my parents a bit because whilst I could take it apart, I often couldn't put it back together. So they eventually cottoned on and bought old hardware from places that was no longer functional. No harm in taking it apart, and it didn't really matter that it ended up in pieces on the floor the next day. So I had a picture here from there's a guy called Todd McClellan who does a things taken apart book. It's basically there's two pictures. One of them is like a really neat taking everything out of like an object, put all the pieces nicely, and then there's another picture right next to it, that same object, and it's basically just been smashed apart. But I thought there might be copyright issues in taking that image, so I didn't do that. Instead, this is a photo of, it's a monitor power supply, and one of the capacitors, or actually several of them, are actually bursting, which meant the monitor didn't turn on. So it's just kind of telling you that from technology, I love to look at from the lowest level down and then look up to the highest level. That's sort of highlighted as well with integration and understanding system architecture. So I love everything technology is basically the point. And yeah, just saying I had that cool picture, but I probably can't use it. So about a year ago, maybe more, we started seriously looking into C4HANA. We obviously had some people already with Hybris Commerce on-premise experience, but C4HANA as a whole wasn't really well understood until Matt came along and did an amazing presentation about how it all fits together. And if you looked at C4HANA at the time, coming from a development perspective, almost every slide had either the picture that Matthias showed with the black background, the little squares of all the different systems, and then there's also this one, which is very similar. And as a developer, I'm like, okay, so there's a bunch of cloud systems. Does Data Cloud, does that sit underneath it? The first question that everyone asks. And there's Cloud Platform with some cool stuff in it. There's S4HANA that sits as a back end. All right, I understand that. And then there's Cloud Platform Extension Factory. Has these cool buzzwords like microservices and extensions, which buzzwords are amazing. Everyone loves them. But they actually do those things in them, as they say, and they do them quite well. So what is Extension Factory? And yes, you might recognize this slide. I stole it from Matt. Thank you. And he touched on it briefly and then left it a bit for this talk to explain a bit more in depth. And so what it's about is, if you think about the cloud systems like Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, or C4C, or Marketing Cloud, and etc., SAP have basically taken on that ownership of keeping those up to date. So they have their upgrade schedules of pushing it to the newest version. And when you have things like CRM in the old days, you could do basically whatever you wanted, and that made upgrades really, really hard. So Extension Factory is kind of like an additional thing that sits off to the side, and it's sort of event-based. So when something happens in one of these cloud systems, an event gets raised, and if you've connected up to the Extension Factory, then it will also then check, do you have any of these handlers for these extensions? And if so, it will then run them. So imagine coming across this and thinking, oh, that sounds really cool. I'm going to have a look into this as a developer because I'm really interested. And the first blog I came across was this one. And as I said over here, it's a really good blog. I'm not saying anything about it. It's really good. He has a lot of series of different blogs about Extension Factory, and they're a good read. But there was a problem. The first step, he says, log into your C4HANA Cockpit. Okay, I don't have one of those. Log into your Commerce Cloud instance. Okay, didn't have one of those either. And so I'm stuck as a developer again, thinking, how can I learn more? How can I dive into this as much as I can? Because that's what I love to do, as I've explained. And what we notice is, in just this first paragraph alone, Kyma is mentioned at least 4 times. I haven't counted, but I can see it 4 times right now. And kind of got into, what is that? So there's a 1 minute and 30-second video on enable.cx.com, and they basically equate Kyma to an open source project name, and Cloud Platform Extension Factory is the commercial offering of Kyma. And that's mostly true to some extent. Cloud Platform Extension Factory also covers the S4HANA and other extensions as well in Cloud Platform, with the serverless runtime and a few other things, and Kyma is a key part of that, as well as the C4HANA Cockpit. So what is Kyma? Kyma is basically a bunch of open source projects that have been put together in such a way that they can support these serverless functions and extensions. So you may hear the term serverless. Does anyone know what that means? It doesn't look. Oh, one. So your answer was basically sort of on cloud functions?
Basically, it doesn't have any database as such where it is directly pointing to. It doesn't have any servers on the cloud. Wherever auto scaling is going on, it will pick up and drop. I guess that is something which is serverless.
Yep, scaling as well is a good answer there, yes. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't run on the server. It obviously has to run on something. And yes, it is about the scaling and taking away that ownership of that server. So as I've got up here, these are quite a lot of the open source projects that make up Kyma. Does anyone recognize any of those? One of them is quite big, and Matt mentioned it in passing, and it starts with a K.
The Kubernetes cluster?
Yes, Kubernetes is the first one. The second one might not be so obvious. The third one you may have used if you've done system monitoring. Grafana, correct. The one after that, it's a flame. Common flame. Angry Birds. No, it's Prometheus. We could probably go through this all day, but I'll just name them. So Kubernetes, Istio, Grafana, Prometheus, Jaeger, Loki, Kiali, Dex, Nats, Knative, Ori, and Valero. Okay, so what do they all do? Kubernetes, probably everyone has heard of. It's a container orchestration, management and scaling, all those sorts of fancy words. Istio is about the service mesh, so connecting all of those together. How do these pods know where everything is? Grafana is the pretty graphs. Prometheus is about performance tracing. Jaeger is about tracing again in more specifically what functions are run. Loki is logging. Kiali is monitoring of the service mesh. Dex is about authentication. So if you log into the C4HANA Cockpit or into Kyma, the first thing that it will go through is Dex. NATS is a messaging protocol between two different containers. Knative is about how you actually deploy your function into a Kubernetes cluster. OI is another authentication service, but it's more for handling authentication outbound, from what I understand. And the last one, Valero, is backups and monitoring. Whew. And I promise I didn't look at the cheat sheet, which is this. And so not pictured is another pretty big part of this is Helm, which contains like a chart for common collections of Kubernetes containers. And that's used quite extensively for add-ons and other things and internally as well. And I didn't do that one because its logo is pretty obvious, and here it is. It's Helm. I think everyone can tell what that is. So that's Kyma in a nutshell, and we'll go into a bit more detail about what that actually looks like with a demo. But before that, Varkes. So this solves the other part of the problem where I had no Commerce Cloud instance. So what does it do? It's basically an application mocking service. So for SAP provide the application mocks for Commerce Cloud, Marketing Cloud, C4C. They will do FSM. At the moment there's only one event for services and then like a bunch for the crowd scheduling. But they haven't quite put that up yet on GitHub. Anyway, so it's actually just a bunch of Node.js modules. One of them is the Varkes cockpit, which we'll see. The next handles connecting as an application to the Kyma runtime with the pairing and the registering events and APIs so that they're available in Kyma to use. And then it can also send one of those events, so simulate what happens when, in say, Commerce Cloud, you create a customer. There's an event that gets raised, and this can simulate that. And then it just has the definitions of what the APIs and events look like. So I'm going to a bit of a demo. Can you hear me if I talk through this? Yes, good. So let's see. Okay. So firstly, this is, for example, the commerce mock that SAP provide. So basically it has a config file, which is just a JSON file that says, I have these events, they're specified by this YAML file, and I have these APIs specified by this, and this is how you authenticate with them, OAuth, etc. It's pretty basic. And then it just defines the name, description, and an endpoint for them. So to actually run this, all it is you just run npm install and then node npm start. But there are actually several ways indicated that you can run this. So you could run it locally on your desktop, or you could do what I did initially, which was, of course my session is timed out. So as I said, I love technology. I've logged into a server at home in Adelaide through a VPN on my phone, which is providing the Wi-Fi for this laptop. I was using the Wi-Fi here, but the VPN connection was blocked. So this is on a Dell-powered server in my house. And this is Rancher. So Rancher is just another manager of Docker containers, etc. And these are actually provided by Google, or actually they're images on Google that you can deploy. I just deployed them on my own server just because I felt like doing that. And so it's really, really easy to do. What we do is add a new service. Let's call it C4C. If I can type, mocks. I've already got this in here because I did this 5 minutes ago. And you basically specify what port you're going to expose this on. I'm going to choose 10,001 because that's not in use. And internally, all of these by default run on 10,000. So I'm just going to use that. Great. And that will pull that image, and the Docker image, and run it. And what that will do is, if we go to one of these, this is, say, the Commerce Cloud mock for Varkes. And you can see here that it provides this list of the APIs that Commerce Cloud would have, and events. And if we click on these, eventually all they are is like a YAML file. And you may notice the Swagger. If you haven't dealt with Swagger, Swagger is just a way of specifying inputs, outputs, etc. of an API to easily use those for other people. And then you can see here we have a link to the API console. So what's that? It's just the Swagger console showing you what these web services are. But we're more interested in, let me type this better, this one, which is the main console. So if you remember the picture I had up just earlier there was the Varkes cockpit, and then there was connections about pairing this application to Kyma. That's what the services here are. This event one is posting an event. Okay, so now let's swap into Kyma. Now this Kyma, let me just reload because it's probably going to time me out, is also running at home on that same server in a different VM. And it's basically a local install of Kyma, which comes with, the Cloud Platform Extension Factory is the commercial version. This is just the version that you can run at home. And we'll see how they differ, which is not that much. And so in here, we create a namespace. I've created one called Commerce Mocks. I've already connected this to my mock thing that I was showing before. And we have a couple of instances where I've created these commerce web services and these events. And what that does is say that now in this namespace, I can create a Lambda function that will respond to the event that is defined in here. So if we go to Lambdas, these are the serverless functions. As you can see, they are running on the server, but this is more about how many pods they have available, which can be scaled automatically. So if we have a look at this event, you can see it's just Node.js. At the moment, there's Node.js 6 or 8 available. If I have time, I'll show you how that works as well. And all I'm doing is a very simple thing here. This main function is called by the handler. You get given event and context, which are two JSON objects. What we're going to do is simply post this to a Slack webhook, and then, just see if that happens. So let's hope the demos work today. And dependencies here is if you've ever written a Node.js app, this is basically just that package.json, which defines, what your application is called, and dependencies. So if you wanted to use any Node package, you can use them here as well. Now, this is a really simple example. We'll expand on this a bit in the real world example as well. So up here is where you select a function trigger. So you can expose it just as a thing that you can call, or you can use these event triggers. And in this case, we're using the customer created v1 event from the commerce mocks. So that would mean if I go back to here, post event, let me first also just like this. So this is the Slack workspace that we'll be posting a message to. We've already got a message, but that's fine. We'll just pretend you never saw that. Delete. Nope. You one over here. No. Okay, so there's no messages there. Here we're sending this customer created event. Now this data is actually defined in the event what the values would be. This is just what it defaults to. So there would be real data available in the mock. And then let's try it out and execute. And if you're paying attention, you would have seen this icon change slightly. There's now a new message there. But before we go there, what we can see is all it did was run this curl command, which is just a web request. And we posted data to this commerce mock Varkes instance and said this event has been raised. And then we get a response that says the message was successfully published to the channel. So now if we go over here, we have the data that was in the event simply posted to Slack. So this was just an example just to show you, stuff does happen, and that's what it looks like when the data comes in. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that later if I have time. Cool. So, come back over here. So the C4HANA Cockpit. So this is part of the C4HANA Foundation. So once you have anything as part of C4HANA, so Service Cloud or Commerce Cloud or anything, you also get access to this. And this is where it ties in all those applications. Instead of being a mock application, it's a real one. And you basically just put in those systems. It picks up those systems that you have as part of your license. And then you can deploy in there a Kyma runtime. So let's have a quick look. This is the extensibility tab in the cockpit. And as you can see, you need to provide currently need to provide a cloud provider access credentials. So you can host it on Azure or Google. And all this does is let you provision Kyma runtime on that. So this is an example from our cockpit. We have two runtimes. One of them was for our commerce testing, and this bottom one of Kyma version 1.9 is one I did about a week ago to set up this demo. So, as you can tell, I like demos more than I do slides, so instead of just going through that, we're going to actually look at what that looks like. So, C4HANA Cockpit. If this works. Eventually. Oh, there we go. So, CX Cockpit. So this is the additional bit that you don't get with Kyma. So you can see your entitlements, so which of these cloud systems you have or are entitled to. There's authorizations and audit logs, and most importantly is this runtime section, which is exactly the slide I showed you. And then from here, we can click into that specific console instance. And you can see it's just Kyma when it loads. You might have seen Dex very briefly up there in the URL. And this is the same as your local Kyma, except there's a few more menu icons, and that's actually just because I didn't install them in my local instance. So the UI of the Kyma cluster is actually quite interesting. It's built on the Luigi framework, which is basically micro UIs. So instead of, I want to add the logs functionality, which is the Loki, when you add that to Kyma, it also adds that little section of UI, but not by modifying this overall UI. It just says, I've got this log bit, inject me into this main bit. That's quite interesting to look into. That's also on GitHub under SAP, Luigi. Anyway, so this one, this takes a few seconds to load sometimes. There we are. I've created a real example. I was going to do Commerce Cloud. I've had to change it to Field Service Management. for two reasons. One, it's new, and so why not? I wanted to play with something new. And two, because the event can be raised through the mobile app. So hopefully I'll be able to show you what happens when like a field service agent logs into the mobile app, does something that would trigger an event. That event gets pushed into Kyma, which then runs our Lambda function, and then again posts data to Slack. So we have this namespace, which we have connected to field service management. And to do that is like also really easy. Just go to admin. I'll let that load because sometimes that takes a while. We have connected this application. So go to the catalog first, actually. And our services here, we have the query API, data API, best match API, service API, and dispatch API. And these all come from FSM. I'm not sure how many people have had a chance to look at what that is, but it's basically about service technicians and how they get their work dispatched and that sort of thing. So you would expect things like service tickets and activities and things like that. So as part of the service API, let's go to the instances. You'll also notice that these have interesting names like query API filthy fold. If you've ever played around with Docker or Kubernetes or anything like that, when you start creating these sort of images, they get generated names instead of a generated string like 5EFAC blah blah blah. And I guess that's just to make it easier to remember. So if you come away from one thing from this presentation, I'm sure you'll remember query API filthy fold. And so the query API is the query API exposed from FSM. This shows the definition here. And it basically, you just post to this endpoint called v1. It tells you what parameters it takes. In this case, it's not quite SQL. It's core SQL, which is slightly different. But if you know SQL, you can probably understand what this is trying to do. It's just getting business partner ID and name and a service call ID and joining based on that, which is a fairly useless example, but that's what it does. And then if we go back to a service API, we can see that there's a lot of other APIs, but there's also this events. There's one of them right now. As I said, I think this was only the January release that put this out, so this will be expanded upon. We can see an example of a payload, and we get the activity ID, which is, for an external system, probably not entirely useful. It's just some random GUID, but we'll see how we can tie that query API to the activity ID that we have in this event. So again, we go into Lambdas. I've created this one called activity closed because it's responding to the activity closed event. So in here, you can see that this is an event trigger for FSM.activityClosed. We do a few things. I would have liked to have cleaned this code up a bit more, and I'm sure Lars over there is sort of chomping at the bit with this select A from activity A. So it's not very well named, is it? I'm sorry. I would love to change it too. But all I'm doing is setting up this query to say I want the activity DTO where it matches the event data's activity ID. And then we pass this into this funky looking thing. So what's this? So further down here, there is this service bindings thing. So any service that's part of the, that you've created an instance of, you can then say, okay, I want to use that as part of this function. And when you create a service binding, you get a prefix as well, so you can use as many services as you want. So if you want to, like we're getting information from the query API, you could also then use the service API to set the priority of something, or you could do some other things, or you could expose other services and bind those. It doesn't really matter. So how we use that is this gateway URL is set into the process env, and I'll show you that as well in a sec. And this v1 came from the service definition that says we want to post to v1. So then we just have a function that wraps that post Slack message that we saw in the previous one. And then we have this asynchronous function, just because I wanted to use the await features of Node.js. So I'm not sure if anyone's ever done much in Node.js, but a lot of things are done asynchronously, and you often want to get the response in your code. So here we've got this asynchronous function, and we actually go await axios.post. So axios is just a wrapper to make it easier to post data through like HTTP post. And so we have to set these headers, because apparently that's needed for this API. If you don't pass them, you get an error, which you can see in the logs. It's quite annoying to debug. And then these parameters need to be supplied. So account is just one of the things that is needed. So when you set up an FSM instance, you get given an account basically, and then within that account you create companies. And so we're specifying that we want to go to this specific company. This identifier can literally be anything. We just call it Kyma and make it easy to identify in the logs where this connection came from. And this DTO is just a version of the activity DTO that we want from FSM. So all of these parameters are specified in the core systems API documentation, which is linked from the service instances. So basically all we're doing is saying we've got this activity ID, we want to find out all the information you have about that activity ID, and then we're just going to jam that data onto Slack to see what it looks like. So let's do that. So this is just DEX, which is Samsung's random thing where you connect to your computer and you can see stuff on your phone. So this field service here is the field service management app. As you can see, I've already created an activity, but so this is what a field service agent for FSM would see. And let's say they want to create an activity, and it can be anything. And we just go demo for sit mail. Sure. And then object is mandatory, so I'll just tie it to anything. Doesn't really matter. Save that. So because the FSM app has offline functionality, all the changes have to be synchronized to the server. So we'll send that. Now we won't expect any message yet because we haven't closed this activity. So now if I go to edit, set the status to closed, save, still won't expect anything because we haven't actually hit the FSM server yet. But as soon as this has finished, we'll expect to see another message up here in Slack. And there it is. And yep, there's a lot of data there, like what you saw previously. Bit of a spoiler, but anyway. Here we can see we just get data back. A is what I specified in my query, and this is all the information about the activity. So we can see that the subject was demo for SitMail, so it was the activity that we just created, and that was done on the mobile app for FSM. Okay. Cool. So let's go back to presentation time. Okay, so recently SAP, I'll come out here for this. SAP put out this SAP Cloud Platform serverless runtime, and it also couples with their functions beta that has been running as well, which are again serverless functions on Cloud Platform. And people are wondering what does that mean for C4HANA Cockpit and Kyma and the serverless functions there. And I think the truth is they'll kind of operate together for a while. But we had a chat with Marco Dorn, the product manager for Kyma, I believe, and SAP Cloud Platform extensibility, and sort of put us onto this a bit more. So the serverless runtime is in Cloud Platform, and this is more about extending S4HANA and to some extent SuccessFactors. It's different but the same. So in future there will be like a management plane in Cloud Platform where you connect your C4HANA to, and the Kyma runtime where we had to specify that it was on Google Cloud, here's my credentials, go deploy it there. They'll actually offer a managed instance of that. So instead of having to bring your own license for it. But as far as we could tell, that would also still be supported if that was the way you wanted to go. But that would bring together in those functions C4HANA and S4HANA as well. So you could use APIs and extensions together from both systems quite easily. And one of the ways that's sort of managed is through a new thing in Kyma, Compass. So this is probably one of the first things I'm going to do after this demo is install multiple instances of Kyma, a greater version of the 1.9, so 1.10, and see what I can do with Compass. So I found this screenshot online about it. It looks like it's just managing these two different runtimes together. Interestingly, there's a runtime called niche, and I don't know what that means, and I could not find any information on it. So I might see if Marco has any information, or if it's just someone having fun with this screenshot with a Mitch runtime. Maybe his name was Mitch, I'm not sure. Yeah, so that would then be that you can connect these together in different scenarios and have multiple runtimes running together. You could also have them in different environments. So like you could have one on an Australian server, AWS, one on in Europe or whatever, and potentially even routing for that. So that's something interesting to explore as well, and with scaling. How's time going? Am I over? Or previous? Okay. So I've got a little bit. Okay, I'll start to wrap up, but I will just show one more thing. So, and it just kind of ties Kubernetes and Kyma together, just because. So, as I said, one of the ways, there are many ways you can deploy Kyma. You can deploy it locally for fun, like I did, which is the hard way. And you can just deploy it on Google Cloud Marketplace. There's just a Kyma thing, you click a button, it deploys, great. And if you have the C4HANA Cockpit, you can also then just use that as well. But installing it locally, is that the right one? Let's hope so. Yes. And let's just be root for reasons. So you get, if you've ever used Kubernetes, you have this kube control command. So if we run this to get all of the pods that are running in our Kubernetes cluster right now, which is this is the Kyma server. Let's make that a bit bigger. You can see there's a lot. But if I scroll up slightly, or a lot, we see there's one here in this Commerce Mox namespace. And this is the namespace that we created in Kyma. So when you create a namespace in Kyma, it actually creates a namespace in the Kubernetes cluster. So it's not just a namespace just to make sure your stuff is separated. It actually manages what happens in the back end in the Kubernetes cluster. And then you can do things like this. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but basically I've just executed bash inside the container that is running the Commerce Mox function. So in here we can see how this all works and it sits together. So kubeless. So this one is kubeless, which is part of Knative. So this gets deployed as this. If I run uname, we can see it's actually just an Ubuntu distribution. And if we cat this handler.js, we'll see that's our code that we put in the Lambda function. And if we go back to kubeless runtime, this is basically what calls this, and this will be much harder to see because it's a lot more code. But effectively, up here, there's a process environment variable with our function name and handler, and then that just gets called dynamically. So when this wants to scale, all it does is say, instead of there being one of these pods, there's now 7. And then they all just run this little bit of code, and then it goes, which one's available? That one. All right, you can run it now, or you can run it now. And so this, I think, is really interesting if you wanted to learn more about it, to actually install Kyma yourself, log into it in the back end, see what it's doing when you do stuff, because you can find out quite a lot of interesting things that way. All right. So summary, Cloud Platform Extension Factory has some really cool opportunities to extend systems in unique and interesting ways. I posted a message to Slack. That's not super interesting, but there have been examples where people use Slack as their main messaging, and if a ticket gets created, they might want to know about it in that channel. But something you could do off the top of my head is send, say, data from a service ticket that a customer has created to like a sentiment analysis. And it says like, oh, this customer's really angry. Maybe we should up the priority on this ticket and get to them faster. Or this one's really happy, so that's okay. We'll just leave it as low priority for now and get to it when we get to it. Something like that. And Kyma is the open source framework. Extension Factory is the commercial offering. And serverless runtime is another thing to look out for in future and keep an eye on. And scaling is made possible by all of those things in Kyma, which are really quite cool. Not sure if we have time for questions, but if there are any. Yeah. Yeah.
Just when you're writing functions, just curious about when you're putting functions together, is there a debugging environment there or something to step through when things go right?
So there's two things. There's logs and tracing. So logs, which is Loki, whenever you do like console.log, that will get printed out into the log, and tracing will trace through all that function. But debugging is not easily possible. But what you could do is take that code from your handler, just shove in the process environment variables if you have them for like the API, and then you can use whatever tools you like in that instance. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Are you aware of any roadmaps going forward for the Extension Factory? Are you aware of any roadmaps going forward for the Extension Factory to utilize hosted services like Kubernetes service on the likes of AWS or Azure?
So there are actually add-ons for Kyma for AWS and GCP services already, if that's what you mean. So you can add those as a service.
No, Kyma is one aspect. What I meant to ask was, if Extension Factory is going forward be compatible to work with hosted services, the Kubernetes service on AWS or similar container service on Azure, without Kyma, you can use a Kubernetes service, right?
I'm pretty sure for C4HANA, the Kyma and that will be the Extension Factory, as far as I know. I don't think. Yeah.
I just had a question about using that setup to consume from the other way. So in the scenario you showed, it was consuming events that were happening, but is it possible to produce something that you can consume in another system, like do a mashup or something? Say you wanted to consume an extra field or something that you calculated in your app. Is there a way to do that?
Yes, so when you define the Lambda function, you can define it as an event, being event triggered, or being triggered by a HTTP call. So when you expose it as a HTTP call, then you have a service that you can call for anything. And that's the microservices aspect of Kyma. This is the extensibility with events. So, yep, cool.
Are there any limitations with this SAP
could do pretty much anything that you can run in a Node.js function. Yeah, currently it's only Node.js 6 or 8, so that is a limitation, I guess, but technically that could be extended to other handlers if you extend kubeless.
My question is, if you are familiar with Azure Data Factory, it also have Event Hub, Kafka, and it is placing all the things into data staging layers. And after that, it is pulled for any other information, whatever we require. Is it kind of same thing what we are doing over here with Kyma, where we are, getting data from APIs and then data massaging them, and based on our rules and regulations, whatever we want to put, is it something similar kind of stuff what we are putting in?
Sort of similar, but it's more about sort of just running things additional to what the standard does. So instead of enhancing, like you would in CRM, you're now extending is probably more the term. But yeah, you could do pretty much anything in these event handlers, really.
Yeah. And when you're saying that BYOL will not be there, and Kyma will be, the next future in roadmap where we will be only using this, is it how much it will be flexible with respect to other technologies?
So what I understood was that the BYOL for the Kyma runtime will probably stay, but SAP will also offer a managed service of that same thing, so you can just select which runtime it's running on, whether it's the Extension Factory, like serverless runtime in Cloud Platform, or Kyma.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, I think, what are you doing to my telephone?
So I just want to comment on that question. It's actually quite relevant. I think with Kyma and SAP HANA, the purpose is on application extensibility, so consuming events and doing like small types of activities. And you compare it with Kafka or data streaming. SAP has actually separate technologies for that as well. So as part of their data management platform, like SAP Data Hub, for instance, which then is able to consume large amounts of data, transform them, massage them, and move and push them somewhere else. This is really around exchanging small snippets of events and information, and kind of building extensions around it.
How much is, how capable it to put large amount of data? How much,
Good question. So the question is how much additional data can you put in? One thing you wouldn't want to push like really large amounts of data through these channels, just like you normally would push large amounts of data through a web service interface, but then you use other technologies like data replication, SQI, or data streaming, things like that.
So that's currently the limitations on the events. So extra large is only 1 gigabyte of RAM, a maximum of 20 replicas of that handler at the moment.
Okay, I think great presentation. I think this is one of those sessions that people are going to replay online and just walk through all of those bits and pieces. So I'm really interested to see the viewers of this session when we publish the sessions online. So thanks, David. That was really good.